The following featured presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
Welcome to Star Warsologies, the podcast about science and other academic fields of study seen in Star Wars. This is a bonus episode to share with you our WonderCon 2025 panel, Science of Disneyland. I've also made a YouTube version of this episode that shows off all of the amazing visuals from our slideshow, so recommend checking that out. I really enjoyed going back to WonderCon for the first time in a long time, and this Disneyland panel was a very big hit, and hopefully it's something we can do every year going forward at WonderCon. It was a great excuse to go to the Disney parks and enjoy this whole new perspective on them. I hope you enjoy this episode, and we'll be back soon with new episodes and interviews. How many of you are camping out for Emperor's New Groove? Be honest. Awesome. Well, you're going to get some science in the meantime. And actually, since we have a couple extra minutes, both Elizabeth and Stuart here actually consulted on the film as science advisors. We have some bonus slides we'll get to here while we get started. Stuart, you consulted on?
I actually worked on the animals when they were still slightly more realistic llamas. Now they're a bit more cartoony, but they were still herbivores and they were still quadrupeds.
Do llamas not like to be touched?
It's hard to get close to find out because they spit. La llama es un cuadrúpedo. Oh, sorry, for you Monty Python fans. All right, so.
And Elizabeth, as our human anatomist, tell us what you shared with the creators on the movie.
Well, back when this was still titled Kingdom of the Sun, and when it was going to be realistic, we did a lot of looking at cranial shapes and skull shapes so that Disney has been very attentive to trying to capture variation without making it into a caricature. And they definitely captured many of the cranial shapes. One of the interesting things about the Inca Empire is that high-status individuals had their crania, their skulls, deformed, wrapped very tightly with boards and rags when they were babies, so that you could never really go in disguise. You were always obviously high status because your head was kind of cone-shaped. And as you can see, these are also very good caricatures, though, of the voice actors that provided their voices. And so when you look at John Goodman or Eartha Kitt, for example, she's legendary here. Disney, when they took this film in a more comic direction rather than realistic direction, leaned into that caricature to create something that I think all of us find absolutely delightful and completely hysterical to this day. It has aged, I think, some of the best of any of the features that we've had an opportunity to work on, even though when Stuart and I both engaged it was more realistic.
We just figured we'd add a little extra science in there for those who came early, and we know people are camping out, and I'll be back in here for the Emperor's New Groove panel.
Yes, we're not giving up our seats.
Right.
So,
Yeah. We might have to give up our seats. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for those who came for the Science of Disneyland panel, and thanks. And welcome to those of you who are hanging out for Emperor's New Groove panel. We're happy to have you too, and we did learn something whether you wanted to or not. My name is Melissa Miller. I'm a science writer and science communicator in San Diego. I love bringing science to pop culture events like Comic-Cons. I'm now working at the San Diego Comic-Con Museum doing Doctor Who science stuff, so come on down to the museum to see that. And I run a podcast called Star Warsologies that's all about science and Star Wars. And Lisa and I did a Fast and Furious podcast too, because there's a lot of science in that. Okay, I'm going to have all of my panelists introduce themselves, give us a brief intro of your expertise and also your Disney cred.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Rega. I am a professor of anatomy at Western University of Health Sciences in Pomona. Any Pomona in the house? We're a medical school, and I spent a lot of my time, of course, teaching human anatomy to medical students and dental students. I have also worked as a consultant to the animation and gaming industry for about the past 25 years. I started with Disney on Lion King, working on the character design for Rafiki, and so I consult typically on humans, human variation, non-human primates, and cultural things when asked to do so.
My name is Stuart Sumida. I'm a professor of biology at the California State University in San Bernardino. Hey, sweet. Inland Empire, go. As we like to call it, Cal State on the way to Vegas, right? Elizabeth is focused on humans, primates, and occasionally animals and creatures, where I come from the other direction, mostly animals, sometimes people and creatures, and have had the opportunity to work with the Disney company. The first film I worked on was Beauty and the Beast, which is probably before some of you were born, I know. And the most recent one, Zootopia 2. Yes, there will be, and it's okay, it's out on the interwebs, so, you know. And a lot in between, as well as for some other studios as well. And I've gotten to work at some of the theme parks. Whenever there have been creature constructions, for instance, Yetis and Yetis inside of Mount Everest and things like that. I've gotten to help do construction and biomechanics. And for those of you, how many have been on the Matterhorn? Right? You notice that little blurry bit of animation you get to see in the dark now? Yeah, that was work with the Imagineers as well. And so it's been a fun roller coaster ride. So.
All right, Lisa.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lisa Will. I'm a professor of physics and astronomy at San Diego City College, which is a community college, a Hispanic-serving institution in downtown San Diego. I'm also the resident astronomer at the Fleet Science Center in beautiful Balboa Park, which means if you go to any of the planetarium shows, I am the disembodied voice you hear in the dark.
It's the voice of God.
Yes. Let's see. My Disney journey started, I grew up in California, so I have seen Disneyland through the lens of someone pre-physics PhD and post-physics PhD, and now I just really find myself most of the time wondering, how did they do that? So I'm actually looking forward to this panel quite a bit.
Hi, I'm Garrett Vice. I'm an Aquarius. I like what? Wrong panel? Okay. So,
Wrong panel.
Different panel.
Yeah. My name is Garrett Vice. I'm a geologist. I've been a geologist for well over 20 years as a professional. Worked on projects on every single continent except for Antarctica at this point. My love for Disney started right from the very beginning. I'm a fourth generation Angelino, although I live in Texas now. And my dad actually went opening day to Disneyland. My mom went opening month. My whole life would get a bus pass and tickets, or when they had annual passes, get that in my stocking. And then I would go all the time. So I've been going for a long time to Disneyland. I've seen it through all the different years. Kind of my golden years were in the 90s, going to Disneyland during that time. I recently, we had a big conference here for the Geological Society of America, where I was asked, along with Stuart, to lead a field trip over to Disneyland to talk about the geology and paleontology of Disney. And then I was featured on a Star Warsology podcast, and that's what led me here to talk to you all today. So,
yeah. We have a link here to a bit more about that field trip. That's how this panel idea got started, was talking to Garrett about the fact that he led a bunch of geology nerds into Disneyland, and everything he told us during the podcast, I couldn't wait to go back to Disneyland and see it for the first time all over again kind of thing. So hopefully you all will have the same experience after this panel. All right, well, let's dive right in. For those of you who came early, you heard a little bit about Emperor's New Groove science, but we'll go ahead and start with Galaxy's Edge, actually, since that's the Star Wars stuff that got this kicked off for us. So tell us, Garrett, I just assumed Black Spire, right, outpost. I assumed, what are the spires? And cite your sources.
Excellent. Yeah, great question. So this was something for me to learn. So one thing I'll tell you about being a geologist is we're like Sherlock Holmes. Right? Scientists are a lot like Sherlock Holmes, or CSI, if you will. We're always trying to solve a problem or understand a problem with the data we have. So this was no different. So when I went to visit Disneyland a long time ago, I noticed this stump on the right-hand side. Does everybody recognize this stump? Has everybody seen this? Okay, if you haven't gone, it's actually the oldest attraction in Disneyland. It's 35 million years old. It's from Florissant National. Florissant National Monument, and what it is, it's actually a preserved stump of a tree, which is really unusual in the geologic record, and it takes a very specific process to have that happen. Really, it takes some kind of volcanic process, an idea called lahars. So folks familiar with things like Mount St. Helens, right? These big mud flows that come down the volcanoes preserve the base of these trees, and then the top parts rot off. And so what they did for Galaxy's Edge, all those spires are actually petrified trees, giant ancient petrified trees, which is really interesting. So the next time you go into the land, look around and look at some of the features that have fallen over, specifically right by where you enter Rise of the Resistance. You can actually see some beautiful rings the Imagineers made. So, and there's a great example, and I've got my model there on the right-hand side. You may recognize from up here. But this is a great example. And so this is based off of what we see at places like Petrified Forest National Park, which is generally how we see these trees. On their side, we don't see the bases. But if you look at the picture on the left-hand side, this is also from Galaxy's Edge, and you can actually see the preserved root structure or stump of the tree. Very similar, if you don't mind going back to the other slide, very similar to what we see in the actual fossil, I like to call it the lily petrified tree on the right-hand side. Now, I don't know, I never found an Imagineer to tell me so, but I often wonder if this, Galaxy's Edge, the whole thing isn't like an homage actually to Lily Disney, who donated this tree tour. So it's one of the hypotheses I like to run with.
No, it's something I never even considered until we talked, so I can't wait to go back to the park tomorrow and see it, because I don't know exactly where these two spots are, but that's the fun thing about Disneyland, is it's so immersive. It's a little bit of everything.
Yeah, so the fossilized tree is easy to walk past because it doesn't have a line of its own, right? But for those of you who are familiar with the rivers of America, as you see the Mark Twain paddle boat go by, right in front of the fence for the rivers of America, as you're looking at the rivers immediately to your left, next to the line for the rivers of America paddle boat, that's where you'll find the tree. And it is an actual real fossil. It is not fake. It is real. It was a gift from Walt Disney to his wife. I believe, was it a wedding anniversary gift?
So the story is that they were in Florissant in 1956, and he gifted that to her, and she said it won't fit on the mantelpiece, so she donated it to Disneyland. So it's a little big, but that's ongoing.
And then these other rocks, I wasn't sure if they were in Galaxy's Edge, but then I think I see an X-wing in the back.
There's an X-wing. Exactly. So the X-wing in the back there, right in front of that, is what we call the lahar, the mud debris deposit I talked about. And the Imagineers recreated this thing so perfectly that when we were on our field trip, we showed that to other geoscientists, and they had a hard time between the pictures of the two to tell which one was real. And so the Imagineers did a lot of really good work researching what this would look like. And this builds this whole story of what actually happened on Batuu. So the story is that you had these large sentient trees, and there were humans living with them at one time. These big apocalyptic volcanoes happened. They buried everything, including the ancient civilization. So who here's gone through the Rise of the Resistance queue and spent the 6 hours in there? Okay. So as you're walking through, next time you go through, you don't get to do it on the lightning lanes, but pay attention to what's in the walls. You actually see clay pots in the walls, and you'll see some old grave markers and other things going on, or I guess they're not grave, cairns in the wall. And so they have all these little Easter eggs. Something like Pompeii potentially was an example of what they were trying to go for.
Wait in the line.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, yeah, look, you got the pictures. Yeah, right there. So excellent. Yeah, and so there's this whole story that's been pieced together for what is Batuu. And Batuu is really based on geology we know here on Earth. And then they took those ideas and created this fantastical place.
Super cool. Well, Lisa, let's get a little meta here in the ways that Disneyland uses science for the experience, right? Force perspective is a really big thing throughout the parks, but they're very good at not letting us sort of notice it.
They're very good, and actually you're showing the AT-ATs here. I would have thought that has to be forced perspective, but dude, they built full-size AT-ATs in there.
Okay. So
those are actually real. So next time I'm on that ride, I want it to break down right there, so I can just sit there and experience that. I know. No, Rise of the Resistance actually really brought back my love of Disneyland, or all of Galaxy's Edge. I never lost my love of Disneyland, but it's the thing that makes me want to come back every time now. But yeah, forced perspective is the idea that Disneyland actually has a really small footprint, and you can't make buildings as big as you would like them to be. So you actually use tricks to make you think things are bigger than they are. So forced perspective is trying to make the audience perceive scales differently. And so on Main Street USA, for example, the rule is about so the first floor is a 1-to-1 ratio, the second floor is about a 5/8 ratio, and then the top floor is a half ratio. And so that when you're looking at these 3-story buildings, you think they're 3-story buildings, but the equivalent is only about 2 stories. And then that really makes the castle look the right size, but the castle is actually really small, and in fact, apparently it is the smallest Sleeping Beauty's castle of all the Disneyland parks. Like, you look at it and you think, that thing is so huge, and it's like, oh no, I could actually walk up that. That's amazing to me. There's other ways you can do forced perspective in terms of color differentials, stuff that's further away. You can, if you want people to perceive it a little bit further away, you make it more blue, and that's like the light scattering due to our atmosphere makes things that are more distant tinted a bit more blue, and you can actually fool people by making things in the foreground a little more red to appear in the foreground, stuff a little bit more blue further away. For when I was a child, everything was so huge to me. As I come back to the park as an adult, things seem to have shrunk a bit. But one of the things that still really works for me is the Peter Pan ride. When you're looking at London, you're so high above London. But I found a stat that said you're only actually 17 feet above the floor there, and that's a sense of scale. And also you can use lighting to fool. You can actually concentrate and use the brightness of the lights to fool you into thinking what the scale is as well. But I actually have a question about forced perspective in the Matterhorn, because for me, the thing that has shrunk the most as I have gotten bigger is the Matterhorn. And my husband and I were both having a discussion about this. We remember as kids the top of the Matterhorn being whiter. It looked like it had more snow to us. Are we suffering from just like a shared delusion like married folks do?
Maybe it's like a climate change.
I know, it's like are they mimicking climate change?
The glaciers are melting.
I know.
It's a very, very subtle, bit of climate change. And the fact that in California they still believe in science.
We'll get to the Matterhorn. I took this picture of myself. This forced perspective thing over in California Adventure too. If you walk along this boundary where real world and the forced perspective thing changes, you actually lose your balance because it's a really cool illusion. So. Elizabeth, what Stuart was alluding to a little bit is your work in the Disney parks. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the robotics and audio-animatronics?
Yeah, well, thank you. Audio-animatronics. Many of you, of course, are familiar with these right from the very earliest days. They were Disney's vision for how to bring certain ideas to life, and one of the things that he had an idea for at Disneyland that never came to fruition was a street called Liberty. He was going to do Liberty Street and recreate Boston in the colonial era, but ran up against really the fact that Disneyland is too small a space. And so this idea percolated along and in fact evolved itself into when Walt Disney World opened, into what they created as the Hall of the Presidents. Now, the audio animatronics were developed with, of course, the Enchanted Tiki Room, which was my father's personal favorite. And it's still charming and still pneumatic, and you may recall from these audio animatronics that you hear that kind of... That's the sound for me of Pirates of the Caribbean, having gone through iterations. And those of you that have ridden on Pirates of the Caribbean know that stories change, right? And sometimes the stories changing is controversial because those of us that were old guys wanted our old stories. And, the newer kids said, well, I don't know, this whole pirate marauding thing is a little less cheerful than they made it look. Right, and then we never quite get what we want, but then we get Captain Jack Sparrow, and he looks great, right? And he was one of the new generation of the audio animatronics that went in there, but they were still hydraulic pneumatic. And you had to program those, and each of those little pistons is a channel. So when it was analog and they were channels, what you really had to go through with these characters is a lot of bang for the buck. And it goes back, to right before Disney World opened, I think it was the 64, 66 World Fair, Mr. Lincoln premiered, right? Great moments with Mr. Lincoln. That you can see at Disneyland. Okay, Mr. Lincoln is here. The Hall of Presidents has never been here, even though it was intended to be here. And Mr. Lincoln has gone through several modifications until now our A1000s, Disney, they're all electronic, right? They're all digital, and they're all electronic actuators. They don't have the issues and the constraints of the pneumatics and the hydraulics, and that's what I ran into. I happened to go into one of the transitions, which was the 2009 Hall of Presidents Refresh project, If you cast your minds back to the 2008 election, Obama had been elected, and what had been presented a problem is that indeed trying to tool up very early on, it was not even certain that Obama would be nominated, and Hillary Clinton was up for the nomination. And it did throw the Imagineers into a consternation because the existing Hall of Presidents figures would not fit a woman. Think about that. I mean, it's mind-blowing when we had the transition between Clinton. Clinton was the last major refresh where the script was redone. A president was brought in to do the oath of office. And when Clinton transitioned to Bush, they just changed out the head. They just used the same figure. They didn't have to do anything
Different tie color, maybe.
Right. And for those of you that are familiar with Futurama, whirling into the future, I thought maybe that was a little meta for me. But I digress. And so the next major refresh, and with Clinton's administration, the script reader became Maya Angelou, very in keeping. Yeah, let's give her a big round of applause. With Bush, the narrator transitioned. And then with Obama, well, the moment was, well, I started working with the Imagineers knowing that they were working on the last generation of what they called the Mark IVs. They were moving with their brand new head of Lincoln, which was being developed simultaneously. They knew, like a paleontologist, that we were working on something that was extinct. Right, we had to do it. That was the cost of the project, and they weren't able to deploy the fully electronic. And so here's the problem when working with animatronics is they take up so much space when they're pneumatic that we had to really make decisions about what was going to be optimized. And so even before the election happened, even before the nomination, we were doing preliminary work, and then we didn't have to worry because we had a man, so at least that was going to be easier. But he was an African-American man. And so that was also different. And so it was a lot of trying to do cost-benefit analysis, get a lot of bang out of the buck. And I will tell you in my consulting work that normally, because you're always trying to optimize, right? You know what the actual thing looks like, but you don't have all of the bandwidth, the tools, the channels to be able to realize that, the budget. And so in this project, how do we get bang for the buck? Normally in animation, we don't look at people's mouths, we look at people's eyes, right? If you're really going to only be able to do one thing well, do the eyes well, the mouth will follow, right? And that'll fit most of your audience. This was the opposite because of the distance and because of what made Obama very particular. We found that the key to the project was introducing asymmetry, which is not normally what you think of when you've got a machine going. Right. But then saying talking isn't this. When you talk, you don't do this. Right? You look like two black coconuts. That was what some of the early tests of dinosaur, Disney's dinosaur from 2000. You know, when they made him talk, you don't do that. What it is it's shaping your mouth and moving your jaw very little. And so we found he has such a characteristic shape that if you just introduce that asymmetry and you're going to pull this actuator harder, and then it's like, well, wait, will the silicone skin tear after 100,000 reps? You know, because that's part of what goes in there. But it turned out to be what really helped that figure. And it was just really interesting working with these individuals out here in California. Imagineers were doing this and sending it down over to Florida. So it is now in abeyance again. The Hall of Presidents is now in another refresh series to bring the current president into the fore again. Of course, there's been a persistent online rumor that, because remember, Disney works these things well in advance. I did not, to be clear, have any involvement with Imagineers after our work on the Mark IV. But in the next refresh, the rumor, unsubstantiated, was that they had actually a Hillary Clinton ready to deploy.
Ready to deploy, I like that term.
Right. But that wasn't the elected president, and that maybe some of the unsatisfactory results were as a result of that. But I have no way to confirm or deny that.
Okay.
But I will say the work goes on in preparation, and so now they're going to be deploying their 81,000 President Trump for their new opening.
Okay, all right. Well, let's towards the topic. Or maybe not. We were talking about the Matterhorn. I put a quick slide in here in case you didn't know the Matterhorn's a real place. What did you say the scale was here?
Yeah. So Walt made this a scale of 1 to 100 of a real Matterhorn. So, and of course, when we all start driving towards, Anaheim, what's the first thing we all look for when we're going to Disneyland? Right?
Matterhorn.
Yeah, Matterhorn. When I was flying in, so I flew into John Wayne on Friday. When I was flying in, the first thing I looked for was the Matterhorn, right? And so it's such an iconic piece, and this really gets at this idea of why I was passionate about this as a geologist, is that so much of the world that Walt the Imagineers created was based around geology and geologic concepts, and really creates this magical world for all of us to escape into. But to do that, it's not just the characters, it's not just the rides, but it's actually the landscape around us that helps us understand that. And this is a great example of that. And also the iconic thing we all look after.
Right.
I will say one update I know about is they did put, sparkly paint on the snow. So if you see it in the sun, so it actually reflects like snow does if you're out in nature. And so they did update it that way. And I'm really curious. I'm going to go back and look at my own pictures now and find out if they actually have taken snow off of this. Because I have some pictures from the 1990s going forward. I'm really fascinated.
I was going to say, because if it was more white previously, then that sort of bluing factor at the top would have made it actually look more higher. That would have been part of the forced perspective. So we actually we both remember it being more white at the top. Okay. I'm curious. I'm going to have to dig up photos too.
Right.
And you alluded to your work with the Yeti, Stuart, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about how your scientific expertise is present on that?
Well, one of the things that happens when you get the opportunity to work with different studios and companies on things like animal anatomy, construction, and movement is that you help them understand creatures that they've never worked with before. So lots of artists do human life drawing, right? But they don't necessarily do horse life drawing or cat and dog life drawing, even though we all have cats and dogs and we know what those things are, right? So I have the good fortune of getting to do that kind of work. And then every once in a while you'll get a question like, so what do you know about the anatomy of dragons? or the anatomy of Bigfoot. Have you ever studied Bigfoot? Like, no. Bigfoot doesn't exist. But no, don't butt me. I'm a biologist. Large mammals need populations of 2 to 1,000 to survive, not just the last one. And sorry, no Nessie either. I'm a paleontologist. Okay. But the question is really, if they did it, we're not making documentaries. I'm stealing a line from Elizabeth. We're not the science police. Okay? We're helping them tell stories. And stories are important. And so if they did exist, what could happen? If an organism was shaped this way, how might it move? And that's where it's fun. So no, I've never dissected a dragon, but I've dissected alligators. She's dissected monkeys. We've both dissected people. Sorry, we teach in medical schools, okay? Okay? And so one of the things that we learned way back to Beauty and the Beast is all the way to How to Train Your Dragon, not Disney, I know, but still. Creatures, mythical and otherwise, are mostly built out of pieces we already know, especially when it comes to physics and biomechanics. So if there's going to be a large Yeti-like creature, could it stand on those hind legs? Okay. Which direction would its eyeballs face? And if it did, how would the backbone go into the underside of its skull? Things like that are what happen. And then if we have to, as Elizabeth told you, that movement, it's animation. There's someone who programs that stuff. And the people who program the robots, they're animators. They are amazing people. We've got a colleague named Doug Griffith, amazing animator. And he all works with three-dimensional robots. Okay? And so what happens is it's no longer even animation on flat paper or the screen. It's come full circle for three-dimensionality, but also in terms of remembering your physics, you're going to buy that thing fast. So they have to create something that's recognizable, that you recognize, that elicits an emotion and does its job all usually within somewhere between 2 and 7 seconds. Okay? And here's the thing. None of you may have ever dissected a Yeti, but you all know within less than 2 seconds if something looks right or if something looks wrong. You all know that. And that's part of the story, right? My favorite part of the story, which has nothing to do with any of that, is that how many people are old enough to remember the buckets that went through? Right? Next time you go on the Matterhorn, look at all the gathered up damaged material that supposedly the abominable snowman has gathered. There's an old bucket. Yeah, so we build things out of pieces we know. I've never dissected a dragon or a Yeti, but I will tell them what I know about how limbs move, how necks work, and things like that. And that's been good fun. We've done that on a variety of projects at Disneyland and Disney World. It's in part because we're academics who know science.
Yay. Well, and if I can build on what Stuart was saying about the animation, is you do have to cheat because of the materials you're using. One of the early innovations they had, the problem with the earliest figures was you would stop and the figure would bounce because you're using rigid materials that don't have the compliance of the human skeleton. So they solved this by going past. We're going to go past and back. That's not what you're really doing, but it looks right. It doesn't look oing, 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 oing. Right? And so a lot of the time is we can't be the science police. We can say, well, this is how it really works. How are you going to make it look the same in your system? When I worked with EA Sports on the Madden game, their feet didn't have any compliance, so the running looked really strange. So you couldn't model that. The game doesn't have that kind of bandwidth. But what you can do is make the feet penetrate the surface of the grass like they're not supposed to. And that error made it look real. So there's the cheat if you penetrate. So sometimes you have to do something wrong to make it look right. And I think that's where we're there to help. The earliest bit of computer animation I remember looking at for Disney was in Mulan, where they were trying to solve a problem with the horses, right? The Hun horses coming down the slope that then has the avalanche. And it really came down to looking at where they had anchored their pivot points. Solved a problem for them by saying, unhook your shoulder and hook your back legs up.
And it was very, very, to them it was like magic.
Yeah.
And to us it was like, that's how animals are built.
Well, we're more than halfway through the panel, and I have a ton more slides here, so we're going to skip over a couple of things and come back. We are also going to leave some time for audience questions, but just in case you'll see rocks, yeah, Big Thunder, this is more rocks, railroad. No dinosaurs on the railroad, we'll come back at this time.
Big Thunder Railroad rocks are great.
Skeletons on the Pirates of the Caribbean, Elizabeth, I don't know if you want to at least talk about that real quick.
Yes, please see, but there aren't anymore.
Right, not the mermaid one, though. But all the pirates are female, is that right?
Not exactly, but a lot of the skeletons in there are now casts. And a lot of the casts, especially of the skulls, are of a female, not a male.
Excellent.
Which is great. There's female pirates again. But so.
Yeah. Lisa, you want to tell us a little bit about motion simulator rides and how they also sort of use physics to trick us?
Well, okay, I was trying to think, when was the first time I went on Star Tours? And it may have been grad night back in 1988, not long after it was actually put in. I know, I'm so. But one of the great things about motion simulator rides is that they actually are able to transport you. Motion simulator rides have movement with a video experience that allow you to be fully immersed in a story. And so Star Tours, the ability of the motion simulator to be upgraded over the years has kept it fresh, right? We're not seeing the same ones. I love the fact that it's the origin of Captain Rex. The original pilot was named Captain Rex, who is now the best character ever from Clone Wars. Right? So motion simulator rides, they typically sit on a hydraulic platform that, like in Star Tours, this one has 6 degrees of freedom. So you have your X, Y, Z. You can move up, down, right, left, back, forth. but you also have pitch, yaw, and roll, so you can twist, rotate on multiple axes. And so you get the feeling of moving and diving and so on, but you're actually seated upon a platform. Now, if you've ever gone through Star Tours and you're waiting to get into the shuttle, they finally open up the doors and you walk, and then you get into a region that looks actually smaller than you thought the shuttle would be when you're entering. And that's because there is such degrees, those 6 degrees of freedom actually move a lot. So you're actually moving in a bigger box that surrounds that car. And I think the Star Tours actually allows you a pitch of 35 degrees at maximum. That's the number I was able to find online, which doesn't sound like a whole lot if you're not used to working in degree systems. But remember, a circle is 360 degrees around, so horizon to horizon, you can tell I teach astronomy, horizon to horizon is 180 degrees, so horizon to the zenith is 90 degrees, so 45 degrees is halfway up, so 35 degrees is pretty close to that halfway up. And you don't usually go at that angle. So if we can raise you up to that point and then drop you a little, you feel like you are falling. And remember, your sense of up and down is determined by gravity. Like, your ears help your brain know which way is up and which way is down because of the direction of the gravity vector pointed towards the center of the Earth, which is why when you're in an airplane and it does a steep turn, you're just like, I don't feel good. Like, I'm just moved. And so, similar to motion simulators, you have the drop rides, right? Well, remember the next time you're in an elevator, you're in a drop ride. You're just, what?
New terror unlocked.
Some triggering going on here.
I live to serve. It's just right? But just, whether or not you're falling close to 9.8 meters per second squared, which is gravity, or a little bit gentler like your elevator. It's okay. I promise. It's okay. So, yeah, I still love Star Tours desperately. And then, of course, they use motion simulations and many of the other rides, including Rise of the Resistance.
Okay, so we're going to go across the plaza real quick here to California Adventure. Elizabeth, can you tell us a little bit about this really cool robot and the Spider-Man one? If you don't know, it's not a real dude. Every show I go to there, someone's like, oh my god. No, it's a robot. It's a really cool robot. So if you know a little bit about how they designed that and what all went into that.
And this is one of their next-gen models because it was freestanding.
Right.
But no, I didn't actually spend any time working on this, much to my chagrin. But if you had asked me, what would you have wanted to work on?
Right.
I would say this. How many people have seen Spider-Man in action? Right? Kind of revolutionary. And this is, I think, in many ways, Disney Imagineers' efforts to catch up with Boston Robotics. And so I am actually much looking forward to this. And if anyone out here from Disney wants to call my old friends and tell them to rehire me, I'm on board.
Well, I will tell you that the lead Imagineer on that was a gentleman named Tony Dohe. And some of you might have seen, they actually did a front page story on Tony in the calendar section of the Los Angeles Times many, many, many months ago when this first opened. And Tony is, I'm very proud to say, a former student of mine. Had nothing to do with anything I ever did as a scientist or a biologist. He was my student at my karate dojo, and I promoted him. I promoted him to black belt. I was so proud. But Tony is a very talented engineer, and because he's a martial artist, he understands body movement. Okay? And so their robotics crew started with literally things that could just bend themselves into the shape of the letter L. And this went all the way back to when they were still working on the Pirates movies. There was a mock-up of the Black Pearl on the parking lot roof of the studio, and every once in a while the Spider-Man robot flew high enough that you could see Spider-Man in front of the Black Pearl. It was great. And Tony sends his regards. He was going to try and be with us. He's at Tokyo Disneyland right now programming more robots. But we're going to try and get him for Comic-Con.
And I know it was one of the projects that Gray Mahara, the Mythbuster, also worked on as well.
Yes.
Buster, right? All of those robots and stuff like that. All right, well, let's talk about Cars Land. Garrett, and I didn't skip over all the rocks. Tell us a little bit about Cars Land and the inspiration behind that. When this land first opened up, it's this huge, big, immersive thing, but it also looks awfully familiar to those of us in the Southwest.
Yeah, so who here's been on the Colorado Plateau, Zion National Park, Bryce? Yeah, a lot of us, right? And it's pretty obvious when you go there where they're pulling from. I have family that live just outside of Capitol Reef National Park, and the first time I saw this, I thought, I'm back in Capitol Reef, which is just in that central portion of the Colorado Plateau. One of the things that they did really well here, has everybody seen the park brochure that goes with this land? Has everybody seen that?
Yeah, Garrett told me about this, and I took a picture of it when I was there on
Perfect,
Friday.
that's perfect. So you can just, as you're going towards the Cars Land entrance, you can go to the right, and they actually have this brochure, just like you'd see places like Yellowstone or Zion National Park or Yosemite. And it really explains what they're trying to get at here. And what that is, actually the cross-section that you see, that middle one that says rock layers, that's actually a true cross-section, true. It's a cross-section through the Grand Canyon that they just renamed for this area. So they're already telling you where they're getting their inspirations from here. Things like the Grand Canyon again, and like Zion and other places that are similar. The arch between San Francisco, thank you, and Cars Land, that's a big arch, like Arches National Park, right? So they're pulling from all these different influences. As a geoscientist, one of the greatest things to see is that you can get really close to those rocks, and you can look at the layers and what they did there, and it really mimics what we see in nature. I could actually take a geology class here and teach them geology off of these rocks. We can talk about a lot of the basic concepts that we use every day, which is pretty phenomenal to be able to do that at an amusement park. And of course, every student's like, yes, please, can we go? How do I sign for that class, right? And so it's like our field trip. We did multiple of those. Yeah, exactly. So where we did that multiple times.
It's also got, I would say, the highest dad joke to word ratio of any signage I think I've ever seen. It's just all car puns. We learned about the Continental Divide, but it's the Lincoln Continental Divide. You can't see it all in these pictures, but there's Mount Everest, and literally everything is a pun.
But a little bit of old school connection. Don't forget the Disneyland Railroad that goes around the original park, and it goes through the Grand Canyon, and then the primeval world. No, there were not dinosaurs in those rocks, so okay, fine. But the actual painting of the Grand Canyon, which inspired Cars Land, is actually quite accurate, the painting of the actual canyon itself. And I think they used tens of thousands of gallons of paint when they first did it, and each time they refresh it. So the geology that you first see in Grand Canyon is pretty accurate, just like the geology you see in Cars Land.
All right, and then our last topic before we go to audience Q&A is also in California Adventure, Redwood Creek. Lisa, I know you said that this experience really gets you.
Well, for some reason, I haven't been to the Redwoods in years, and I was not expecting going to the Redwoods in Anaheim. So I really found Disneyland, one of the things that Disneyland does so well is it's such an immersive experience. It doesn't let you see outside the park, and this is one of those times where you're immersed even inside the park that you can't see out and you're transported somewhere else. I cannot grow a plant to save my life, but I do just want to give a shout out to the groundskeepers and the landscape architects at Disneyland for the attention to detail of every plant everywhere located in the park. It is beautiful and amazing, and this is to me what makes California Adventure, like, this is California. So if you can't get out of Southern California, this is what Northern California feels like.
Garrett, I know you also made me realize that the water ride is more than just a water ride, also a science lesson.
Yeah, so because this park was based off of California, these are features that maybe folks have seen as well. Both of them right outside Mammoth, California, for those of you who are familiar with that. You have the idea of Devil's Post Pile there. These are columnar basalts on the left-hand side. And the right-hand side is the Hot Creek Geologic Area. And you can go visit both of those just outside of Mammoth, California. So another great job of recreating these geologically fantastical places within the park that take you away. And a lot of people don't see these. Well, maybe they see if you go through the ride, you'll definitely see the hot springs. But the columnar basalts are actually on the backside. You actually go past a mine cart, which is an homage, of course, to the gold rush. And then you end up at these columnar basalts.
It's a hidden trail. I took this picture when I was there on Friday, and I don't know all the years. I went to California Adventure the summer it opened. I got married in Disneyland. I don't think I've ever been on this trail that's behind the water ride.
So everybody check that out. It's really cool. So
Yeah.
the detail there is amazing.
Yeah, so, and then I love also on the Redwood Trail, there's just, little science facts everywhere. Can't help but learn hanging around Disneyland. So yeah, that was the premise of our panel. We will open up for audience Q&A. Questions start with who, what, where, when, why. Not well, actually. But we are open to hearing questions, and we've got our panelists eager to hear from you. So there's no microphone in this room, so we're going to yell. See you in the front here.
Stay tuned. That's a very good point. That's a very good point. Garrett and I have been asked to write a book called The Geology of Disneyland. And that will include some of that.
The question was about the geology actually of Anaheim.
And it will include something about the underlying geology in Anaheim and Southern California and California in general. So because we do, as you know, live in earthquake country, and the amount of engineering that goes into making these rides safe is remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable.
But thanks for the question.
Sorry,
because I'd love to keep doing these panels. They can be different every year, so I wrote down your. We'll do that.
Yeah, thank you.
So.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, in the purple and black.
I would love to hear more about the geology of Big Thunder Mountain.
Yes. All right, audience plans from Garrett.
Yeah, thank you.
We go. We got the slide we skipped. To be fair, the only slide I think we ended up skipping. So
It's good.
It's good. And there's no dinosaurs, right?
We go way back to about
Right.
hours ago. So Big Thunder Mountain's based on Bryce Canyon National Park, again pulling from this idea of the desert Southwest and the Colorado Plateau. And of course, anybody who's ridden this or been around this, I'm sure most people in here have done it at some point. The idea is to get you to feel that escapism again, to be there. What's fascinating about this ride is they've done such a great job going between the actual park. What you can see on the right-hand side is a feature actually called Thor's Hammer, and I took that picture this summer when I was doing some research out there, and you can see the hoodoo, so these are called hoodoos, and you can see how the Imagineers recreated something very similar, these big spires that stick out, right? Again, I can take geology classes out here and talk about these processes. One thing, that's great, so go there. In fact, you can see how they've even made layers on the right-hand side when they're doing these rocks, and they have little pinching and swelling and swirls. And so they've really tried to capture, again, this idea of what was the environment, what they think the actual environment would look like if they immersed you in that, right? One other thing I'll mention real quick is you'll notice the rocks on the left-hand side are from Matterhorn, and the rocks on the right-hand side are from Big Thunder. And in fact, this is probably even later than Big Thunder because it's going between Galaxy's Edge and Big Thunder. So it's a little, but it carries on that same theme. And that is one thing that was really interesting the Imagineers did is they changed how they did the rocks from the 1950s and 60s where they just splatter it with white and their gray rocks or gray plaster, white and black to make everything kind of look like granite. Even the limestone at Pirates of the Caribbean looks like that. You fast forward to the 1970s when they did Big Thunder Mountain and you start getting a lot more detail. One last thing I'll say, just real quick. I saw you had the dinosaur on there real quick.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody knows and loves the dinosaur, right? That's so cool. So the rocks, yay, dinosaurs. Okay, yeah. We didn't get talking about much. I know. Stuart, I'm taking your thunder. Dinosaurs geologically did not live during the time of Bryce Canyon. They were long extinct by the time those geologic deposits were put down. But it is really cool for the story here at Big Thunder Mountain to have a dinosaur.
Because we're not making documentaries.
But so no dinosaur fossils in the Big Thunder region?
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
No.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Others, mammals.
Okay. All right. You and the gray sitting back there. So the question is about the Pirates of the Caribbean. I kind of glazed over earlier. This was a fun fact.
So none of us were here when they built it, but the urban legend is that some of them were, some of the originals were medical specimens that were procured from biological supply houses and medical schools, but those have all since been removed out of respect for the materials that were once there. But one of the things you can see is that some of the plastic casts now, which often come sold from medical supply houses, have a little cut there, so you can look at the inside of the skull. That's what we teach students in medical school. So they always had to hide that. They had to, putty that in or paint something across it or put a little bandana over it to hide that and some of the model skeletons. So.
Okay, yes, you there and appreciate that. Oh, apparently more rumors about the skull, maybe a leftover skull there above the headboard. I can picture the spire. I don't think we know.
I don't know, but what I do know is that the crossbones there used to be accurate femora, and they aren't anymore. They're not accurate. Now they're like Flintstone bones.
Oh, that's going to bother me when we go on Pirates tomorrow. Yeah, see you there in the gray shirt. Yeah, good question. So how early in the process do you guys usually get brought in for consulting projects?
Yeah, the best projects you get brought in very early, but that is not always the actuality, right? I think working with Imagineers requires more of that punctuality than some of our other projects, certainly.
Yeah. When we worked on the Yeti character in Expedition Everest for Florida, we were working on that part when the mountain was still being built, was still underneath scaffolding. So years in advance, because many projects go in parallel. So they're building the structure itself and the track itself at the same time that they're building the animatronics to go into it. Any project we ever do, we can always tell you the earlier and the better. So.
All right, so we'll take one last question. I see. Okay, the second part of the question is great too. Is there a code? Clearly not, because they're up here spelling all their secrets. But the first question was on Monsters, Inc., and I didn't write that when I was in California Adventure the other day. But apparently there's a part where you can see Sully and Mike through the door, and then you go around, and there's nothing there. So, do we have any ideas about how they do that? Is it just a screen? There's parts of the Yeti ride, right, where it's just on screen?
A lot of that is mirror work, 45 and 90-degree mirror work, so you see something from one angle, something from another. I can't speak to that specific one, however. They are very good at mirror work, not only there, but in things like Haunted Mansion and so on. And what we're not allowed to tell you, we're not allowed to tell you, right? I will tell you this. There are very, very specific rules for very many things, one of which is that you are never, if you are a character like Sully or Mike, or even a princess or a prince, you are never allowed to be out of character where someone from the public might see you, even behind the scenes. If someone's visiting, you must stay in character till you're out of view.
Okay, well, we will get out of the way for the Emperor's New Groove panel, but thank you so much for coming out. Feel free to come chat with us out in the hallway here for a little while. We'll answer any and all science questions we can get to, and hopefully be back next year. Thanks.